Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Namulen Bayarsaihan, and I'm the Education Director at the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum, located in Ridgefield, Connecticut. The Aldrich is one of the oldest contemporary art museums in the country, and we were founded in 1964 by art collector and fashion designer Larry Aldrich. We are also one of the very few museums that are non-collecting, so we consistently have new exhibitions on view throughout the year. Tonight's conversation will be between two artists, Lucia Hierro and Joiri Minaya, diving into Hierro's current exhibition at the Aldrich called Marginal Costs, on view through January 2nd, 2022. Lucia Hierro was born in New York City and attended SUNY Purchase, receiving her BFA, and the Yale School of Art, receiving her MFA. Her artwork has been presented widely in solo and group exhibitions throughout the world, including the Bronx Museum of Arts, Casa Quién in Santo Domingo, the Museum of African Diaspora in San Francisco, primary projects in Miami, and many more. Her work is also included in the JP Morgan Chase art collection, Centro Cultural Eduardo, León, Jimenes, the Perez Art Museum Miami, and the Rennie collection in Vancouver. Joiri Minaya is also a New York-based and Dominican-American artist. She studied art at INAV in the Dominican Republic, the Chavon School of Design, and Parsons in New York City. Joiri has exhibited widely as well across the Caribbean, the US, and internationally. She recently received a Jerome Hill Fellowship, a New York Arcadia Award, and the Bricks Colleen Brown Art Prize. She has participated in residencies at Skowhegan's, Macmillan, Bronx Museum, Redbull's House of Art, which Lucia has also been, as well as Skowhegan, Socrates Sculpture Park, ROMI, Vermont Studio Center, and next year will be a resident at Fountainhead Arts in Miami. Please feel free to ask any questions while Joiri and Lucia are in conversation through the chat or the Q&A in the Zoom. And we will leave a moment at the end where Joiri will address the questions and take us through the end of the conversation. So please know also that we are recording tonight's conversation, and enjoy. And with that, Joiri, I will leave it to you and start the slideshow.
Thank you, Namulen. Thanks, Lucia, for inviting me to have this conversation with you and to the Aldrich. Very excited. So yeah, I was thinking of how we met. I think, was it in that show that Amanda Savignon curated? Is that, or did we meet before that? I feel like that's.
I believe that you had done an article for Onto.
Yeah, but I think that was after, no?
Was it after? Yeah.
Yeah.
In a while.
Yeah, and then we had that very long conversation that gave the title to that article, 13 Hours with Lucia Hierro.
Yeah, it was 13 hours with me one day.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, so I'm happy to be here discussing your work and bringing in some points of view from mine. But I am curious what your relationship to the Aldrich is. Yeah, I think you have a history with this museum.
Yeah. First of all, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. I think that we both have long been admirers of each other's works. So this is really cool. I used to go to the Aldrich when I was at SUNY Purchase. The first time I would imagine was through a school trip that I did to see a professor's work. I think Kate Gilmore was showing some works and video works there, and so I kept going back because I was like, this is an incredible little like gem of a museum that if I was not going to school in Westchester, I don't think I would have really like told myself to go there. But then I started to sort of like like look forward to getting their catalogs, like getting their little catalogs and keeping. So I actually had a stack in my studio. And when we were working on this show, Amy was like, we're gonna work on a catalog, and I don't know if you know how we've done them before. And I was like, I have a whole stack. And she was really excited to see all of them. But yeah, I couldn't believe it. When I saw that room, that was like, I had a goal to show in that room. And that was the gallery that I ended up showing in.
That's so amazing. Yeah. So Marginal Costs. I'm curious about the title of the show. We were saying before, it reminded me of the Juan Luis Guerra song, El Costo de la Vida. Juan Luis Guerra is like a big Dominican musician. And El Costo de la Vida is an iconic song that is talking about the cost of life. I mean, the title translates to the cost of life, but he's talking about all of the material and economic challenges that our people go through. So tell me about the title.
Yeah, so the title is somewhat connected to that song, and that I had an exhibition a few years back. I think I'm gonna say it was 2019, called The Cost of Living, and it had a two-part. So at Independent Art Fair, the booth was El Costo de la Vida, and then the second half of the show was in the Bronx, at legendary graffiti artist John Crash Matos' space in the Bronx, and so that one was The Cost of Living. And so I wanted people to sort of travel between both, and there was a bit of a history with that gallery as well, because he was one of the founders of Fashion Moda, and so there was a sort of uptown downtown dialogue with them as well. And so this, when the chance, the opportunity to show my work at the Aldrich came about, I knew that body of work that I was making for The Cost of Living, I sort of wasn't done delving into those ideas, and I wanted to sort of expand upon them a bit. And so Marginal Cost came from talks with my friend Tahir, who's also a great artist, Tahir Carl Karmali, who's from Nairobi, Kenya, and he has a background in finance and tech, and so he's really wonderful to talk to, because he thinks of things not only materially, but also how do those materials function within across political landscapes, right? And so he told me this term, and he's like, look it up, like go do your research on this term. And he doesn't give you anything for free, really. So I went ahead and I was looking at these terms, and I was really fascinated with finance terms in general, because they're cold, they're about numbers, and we don't really think about the human costs of production, and also of optimization, right? Or like growth, basically. And so I think right now we're feeling ramifications of that sort of American growth mentality, that everything has to be more and more and bigger, and everybody that's outside of the US understands inflation in ways that now the US is starting to catch up to that knowledge, right? So I have friends that are also in finance that are from Venezuela, and they're like, yeah, we know a lot about that. So so that's where the title of the show was coming along. I could have never anticipated that then COVID was gonna make the show hit certain things in a different way. But I think that if anything, it heightened what the work was already about. and what I think people were maybe not quite missing, but maybe not making a connection to. And not that I'm glad for COVID, but it took COVID to have people sort of realize like what that work was about and what it was commenting on and all of this.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting how it enhances, or like underlines a lot of the things that were already in your work before and continue to be, like contextualizing them in a different way. Or rather in a more tangible way, maybe to the people experiencing the work. Well, speaking of material qualities, I am very interested in ideas of transparency and opacity. The image that we're seeing is my work now, a work called Tropticon, which is a greenhouse that I appropriated and covered with this perforated vinyl to create this illusion of transparency from inside and then opacity from the outside.
And this was right? Socrates.
I'm sorry?
This was
I was at Socrates Culture Park in 2018. So these ideas of transparency and opacity as material qualities, as well as concepts that speak to our experience in the world as people of color, and these ideas of not being easily consumable and having layers of refusal and opacity to mediate that experience, or rather the consumption of that experience, or the interaction of that experience. Like in works like the one that we're seeing now, Divergences, which was presented at the Kemper Museum last year. And it features those 4 collages that are photo collages made of fabrics that I scanned and photos that I took, and like merging it all together. But strongly thinking of this idea of revealing and obscuring, and kind of fixated in this moment of taking this bodysuits that I sewed off as like this moment of tension between these 2 positions. So thinking of this, or coming from this place, when I went to see your show, I noticed some of these ideas playing out in different ways in some of your recent works, especially with the Back series. I was thinking of this one that is in the screen right now, Sweet Beans. I think there's a detail in the next one. So can you talk about these ideas of transparency, opacity, and these layers of, how identity is mediated, or how you want to mediate identity, so it's maybe not as easily consumable, even though it is about consumption and it's about consumable products. So I think like there's a lot of interesting stuff there to unpack.
Yeah, there's a way in which using images that feel identifiable in a sense, like you've seen these things somewhere in a supermarket or a bodega or anything like that, or even the shape of the bag itself is a tote bag pattern. So it's familiar, but obviously with the change of scale and color and the way that I'm working and material, it sort of pushes it away from your experience of that thing. And the arc also becoming sort of the arc of the shape of your body. So that weird armature sort of then makes museum the body in a weird way. But I was thinking that I took a lot of notes during my critiques when I was in grad school. And it was more so about how people were reading work than it was about the specific things they were saying about, like it was sort of like, oh, that person has a relationship to going to a space and seeing something and encountering something in that way. And my trips to museums or galleries with artist friends or with classes, how we were taking in information was always something that I was curious about. And then also seeing how our the work that's made in our country, in the DR, I should specify, right? That is consumed as sort of as a souvenir, and that people tend to forget that the things that are souvenirs are based on something that existed there in a high art form, right? And so I was thinking about how that is a thing that even I, who was born here, couldn't shake that read of the work. That whatever I made was sort of always like a pat on the head of, you know, both as a woman, but also as a Caribbean woman making work that it would be read that way. And I worked, you know, hard to find a form in which I could move away from that as much as possible, but play with it and flirt with the idea. And I really loved the ways in which other artists played with that same idea of opacity and transparency. Actually, those works are so great. The ones that you showed with the taking the bodysuits off. It's a strange sort of back and forth between like that figure ground thing, but also like you're not so sure if they're putting it on or taking it off, or it looks uncomfortable. There's like a struggle as well. But there's also a sensuality. So you're being sort of almost like enticed by the image, while also there being an element of literal like camouflage. So hiding and so I realized that in choosing a sort of pop art form, that I was gonna have to fold in a lot more than just the one-to-one relationship to pop. Like, here's a thing that we consume and come and consume it as well, and like and you can be guilt-free in that you saw this like cute thing that a Dominican artist made for you to understand. And there was a tactic in some of those larger bags of placing an artwork within them. So that one has a piece, I'm always forgetting the name, by the other Rousseau. And he did this amazing, like, beautiful still life with a ham or something, like in the middle, and a rolled up newspaper and all this stuff. And so I took a photo of that at the Met and then printed it out, and it's in this bag. It's an entry, you know, it's an entry point for some people to like the people that really want to fight to see that painting, to know what painting that is. That's a really interesting way of looking at that piece, right? Like, why are you doing it? And yeah, I presented that. So I'm also like drawing you in through that weird thing there. But most of the time, the people that understand what these different elements, what these ingredients, right, are for, the title, sweet beans, or the dish, sweet beans, almost don't even see the painting. They almost like, I don't think I've heard a Dominican person come up to me and go, hey, so what was that painting? Like, that has yet to happen. So I find it a sort of weird test to see how people read the works that have those paintings in. So that's just like the top of the iceberg of transparency. And I think the later pieces, the more recent pieces, the black bag specifically, or I think the other smaller grocery bags, whose colors changed and became a little bit more opaque, those had elements that felt more universal, that didn't just feel of one, that it didn't feel like the audience could just throw it on on just being Dominican consumers, which they never were meant to be that, by the way. But I think that it's also a thing that was pushed on a lot of the bags. Some of the bags are that, and some of the bags are just any regular consumer. And so I think that the darker ones start to really point at at everybody else that's doing the consuming as well, which is another conversation, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm super interested in like how identity is consumed and packaged as well in my work, coming from a whole other angle. Like I'm specifically thinking about how our bodies are seen and how our country and the Caribbean region has been historically represented visually and packaged for consumption in a particular way, imaged in specific ways. And then you grew up mostly in the diaspora. I mean, I know that you grew up for a period of time in the DR as well. And I'm fascinated by how even here, our identities are still crossed by our relation with economy and capitalism through things like branding and products, and how you were saying how some products are associated with specific groups of people, even when they're like widely consumed by a whole other bunch of people. Yeah. I feel
I was talking about this recently, about the relationship between chocolate things, cinnamon things, or wheat things, and how those things are branded. Like Life cereals and things like that. For a really long time, you'd have like chocolate things that had Black children on the cover of the thing.
Oh yeah, oh geez.
Cinnamon things had Latinos on them, and so there was a real a strange psychological connection to these like things. And I think that the notion of paradise, or the notion of like a people that are there as sort of subservient to a colonial class or something, like it's a thing that feels still very much a perception of the island.
Yeah.
And I love that when I went to DR not too long ago, I love that folks were wearing the tropical patterned, like, shorts.
I think that's become more and more popular outside of touristic spaces specifically.
Yes. And so I loved, it was like youth and like like very, very like cool, fluid fashion, and like it was just so cool. And I'm seeing these young kids like wearing these prints, and the tourists looking at them being like, wait, is that right? And it's such a like mirroring back and such a like tongue-in-cheek thing that like that's our ironic thing in the like here it's like normcore or something, but like there it was like that, and I found that so funny. And then there are the things where people don't know that they're doing it. Like there's the like there's a preppy class of a upper middle class or something that pops their collar, not knowing like the history of that within the United States, and other parts of like,
that's definitely fascinating. I hadn't thought of that, but that's definitely a thing to think about. I mean, thinking of class and aspirations and decontextualizations like that, not knowing. I think we can move on to the next slide, Namulen. Or well, actually, the next. That's still my work and thinking of like.
I was gonna ask you something really quick.
Oh yeah, sure.
Do people have assumptions about where you're taking the photos of you?
Where I'm taking the photos
of you
of the containers? What
like,
kind of assumptions?
Like, do they assume like every single one of the photos are in a tropical location? Or like...
Yeah. That sometimes happens. This is Wayfield in the Bronx, which is very funny because it's like a very European-ish kind of tradition of landscaping in some of those spaces. Not the entire garden, but some of it. And this area particularly, has some of those elements. But then there's other photos that I've taken that are not in this slide that can be tricky to place, and that's also something that is interesting for me to play around with. But yeah, people definitely tend to assume tropicalness in terms of location, which sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, and that's part of what I'm interested in those works. Yeah, but moving on to these works, like continuing with the back series, I was thinking of, well, actually I was thinking of the mural that's kind of a memorial that has a green background. I forget the name, and the black bag, which I think are coming forth in the presentation. But you know, during the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about how we're all in the same boat, and how this condition, like this, like situation made us all equal, and how we were all, you know, facing this challenge, this worldwide challenge. What are your thoughts on this, and how is your work speaking to those changes and adaptations that we had to do through the pandemic?
I think that there's possibly only been like one occasion in which that sentiment is true. It's probably like the atom bomb. But I don't think that it quite applies to this, in that if anything, it showed, right, like it made everything very clear in terms of like our healthcare system and who gets to access what, and these pre-existing conditions that people talk about are more prevalent in some places than others, right? Like, especially where I work in the Bronx, and in the South Bronx, it's one of like it's one of the areas with the worst like air quality, because the Bruckner Expressway cuts through this area. And you also have like an oil refinery by us, and like all this recycling plants, and it's all pushed to these margins where people think that, you know, well, there's no life there, so why care what we're throwing back there? And I think, you know, there is the side of me that's like, yeah, if we're thinking on a very like humanist like way of seeing things, like yes, we all have death in common, and and this thing heightened that, the possibility of that being a thing that we all are facing. And I think that's the part that I'm actually in a sense, like, I find that that's a interesting takeaway from the whole thing, was like people Jesus Christ, people realizing like, oh, we could die too. This idea of being rich and being immortal is very funny to me. So this piece was, you know, I wanted the rest of the work to also exist in context to that loss, because it was happening so frequently all around me. I was living with someone who was an older Dominican person, and she had friends that had passed, and then I was seeing the flower guys in the streets, like just selling roses left and right, and still like that there was still a hustle around, because everybody's got to eat, right, and everybody's got to survive, and that this was the hustle now. Like people are selling candles, hand sanitizer, flowers, and people are talking about Zoom funerals. And then people are talking about how they don't know what the hell Zoom is. And so how are they gonna go to some funeral? Like all these conversations that were happening, I couldn't ignore that while I was making this work. And so I wanted a little moment. There was this is an alcove space in the museum where you cross from one gallery to the next. And I wanted there to be at least like a beat, like a pause where, Jesus, can you tell that I did a playwright, a beat, between the bodies of work, because the main room had new things, and the room in the back had older works, and
Mm-hmm.
it was this like moment of taking a moment to acknowledge like, oh yeah, and people died and people continue to, right? Like it's not a thing that's completely over with.
Yeah.
I wanted to do it in the most respectful way that I could, and not in an exploitative way. You know, like I'm not specifying who's died here. Or I'm not, you know, this isn't specific to anybody. It's sort of an essentialized little thing.
Yeah. Well, but I think it also has specific codes that highlight, you know, populations that are marginalized, which were the ones that were more impacted by the pandemic. Like I've also lived in the Bronx and Washington Heights, and I'm very used to these elements of like the, how do you call that black thing, milk crate, like the
milk crate being the
yeah
the sort of pedestal that
yeah
things are put on.
yeah, and the candles and like the bottle of alcohol and the Virgin and like all of these different elements, I think, are also again thinking of opacity and transparency, you know, being accessed by specific groups of people in a different way than other groups of people that might not be familiar with those signifiers around them. I think we can move on to the next one. I think it's a black bag. Yeah. And you were talking earlier about this bag has more, let's say, quote unquote, universal essentials.
Right.
Although, you know, that's the whole universal thing. It's a word that I kind of really hate, but I use because it's comfortable or quick to get to what I'm trying to say. But there's also something kind of funerary or somber about the color of the bag, and that transparency feels kind of like a veil, like that classic, I don't know, black and white movie veil that people wore to funerals. Yeah.
Fellini style thing.
Yeah.
I need more female references. I'm tired of saying Fellini. But it's good. But yeah, that was it. It was one of those things where I kept seeing the folks in my own house where I was living at the time, and most people at the supermarket were buying stuff to bake. It was like this. It was such an interesting.
The sourdough period.
Yeah, it was such an interesting thing to see people make, because it made me think about art and it's maybe being essential for survival, and that if you don't know how to do that, then you're using your hands in other ways. But yeah, that was one of those things that I was very. I wanted to make a bag that felt like everybody's bag, because I think it starts to really confront the viewer in a different way. Mark Thomas Gibson and I had a talk recently, and he talks about opacity in terms of shame, like the veil is shame, and I really love that idea as well. Like this idea that sometimes we're a little ashamed of our own consumerism, our own consumption.
Right.
And then the gates are in a way an extension of that conversation about guilt, about boundaries, about, there's a lot of things there. Like there's a community in Fort Greene that I was around, where I kept seeing the circulars being put in the morning, like in front of people's homes, and clearly with signs that are like, don't put these things outside of our house, or and the division between the folks living in these really beautiful homes in brownstones and the houseless population that was suffering a lot during the pandemic, more than usual, and it just started to become even more visible to me in a way that I you know, I think one can become numb to it, especially as a New Yorker. I've lived here my whole life. You just see it. And actually, even in DR, right? Like it starts to, you see the kids outside asking for stuff and you get used to seeing them. And so what happens when I'm like making this thing really large, this barrier, really large, because normally a gate is so easily like I could jump over those tiny little 3-foot gates, and to make them really large, and to have the designs be really large and have this sort of just symbolic like barrier, but you can move around it. And then there's that, the circular is that piercing through, is that sort of strange act of like penetration that happens in the work.
Yeah. Yeah, which is also fascinating because of the materials. Like that's the one that's, this soft fabric material versus this like strong iron that is not gonna move or go anywhere. But then the fabric is what's doing the piercing. I find that very interesting.
Yeah.
And then behind the gates, we're seeing some of the murals also. So I think both in the gates and in the murals, you have this matter of scale, which is very important to your work. And this like enlargement or like, larger than life, almost monumental experience with this works. But yeah, can you talk about, that idea of scale a little more? And also I'm thinking of, scale, composition, color theory, art history, like all of this formal academic things that I know from previous conversations that are important to you, but then how you're using them to kind of how you're intentional with these concepts in relation to the immigrant and Dominican experience, not necessarily just that, but coming from that.
Yeah, I don't
like, I wonder if there's like some sort of translation going on with this academic things and this experience, or I don't know, how do you see it?
Yeah, I think, whenever I heard things like that, these were European modes of like higher education and the arts and things like that, it's like yes and no, right? Like the ideas of scale and color and all of that are things that exist in everywhere. Like people are who hasn't questioned, like a giant like sculpture or looked at color in a way and analyzed the way that you look at, a sunset and you're trying to draw it and you're trying to interpret that or whatever, right? Like that feels very universal to me. I really held on to those things within my study of painting, and I try to bring it as much into the work as I can, just because it's also a game that it's a visual play that I like for myself. But I think that there is something to a mood, right? Like to the magic hour lighting, to which is sort of like what I pulled from for this mural. It's sort of like when the sun is setting and everyone's putting their things away, right? There's a feeling to that that happens in the street, and there's a color and there's a thing and there's a definite vibe. And then it also there's like this split second where it looks just like DR, like it might as well be the same like location or something. Like there's a moment that happens in a rub that you're like, oh wow, that reminds me of what Macorís looks like at that hour.
Totally, yeah.
Smell of a vivero, like that's a real visceral like thing. And so yeah, you had done this piece, which I find so interesting.
Yeah, this is a piece from 2012. That's actually my first moment playing around with 16 millimeter film. So it's like a double exposure. Say what?
I live right by here.
I know, yeah, that's like Dykeman.
Yeah.
So that was when I was living where I was living at the time, and I had just moved from the DR, so I was kind of processing this displacement and this kind of, you know, yearning for another location, this doubleness in betweenness, being at two places at the same time. So I was doing that with the superimposition of the film and the exposure and all those things. But yeah, no, I think it's interesting what you were saying about, you know, this idea of these European modes being imagined as not including these other experiences. I wasn't necessarily going that in that direction, but I think that you're very intentional about how you're taking this, you know, sunset color and you're not abstracting it to orange just plainly. Then you're also including the specific image of how that sun is hitting that, you know, cart where it's reflected, and it has those images that are specific to a group of people or an experience or a location. So it's like using those signifiers, but not trying to abstract them to make them more palatable to this, like, quote unquote, universal, generic, accessible academic audience, but using those same things that you learn in school and placing them specifically in your experience. I think that's the intentionality of your work that I really appreciate in that space. And then I was thinking of digital, you know, digital space and this fragmentation also being present there. And your process of like using Photoshop, taking photos, processing them digitally, making something else, which is also something that I do in my work. These are recent collages that I've been doing based on ethnographic photos that I find on the internet, postcards that I've collected, and thinking about this experience, or rather like this representation of women in tropical spaces across time. And for, again, going back to this idea of consumption, maybe this is like a lot for a question, but, you know, thinking of this fragmentation, the process of the digital space and real space, and then these works that are on the screen now lead me into one specific piece of yours, which is the one with the mattress and the Uber Eats driver that is kind of cut out, and you only see the motorcycle and the, like, the bag, the delivery bag. And I'm thinking specifically of this because, like, in my work, sometimes the omission or the fragmentation of the figure comes from as a response to this tension between representation and objectification, and like me trying to figure out how to navigate that. And maybe I'm projecting because I'm coming from that, but I wonder if this is something similar to you, thinking of this piece specifically, which is this the one that is called Esencialmente Esencial? Is this one?
Yeah, essentially,
okay.
Yeah, Esencialmente.
Yeah, yeah. So I was thinking in Spanish, but
yeah, but it is the title's in Spanish.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, that, you know, by no means is it a new idea or a new thing to do. And I was actually very, like, conscious of that while I was doing it. I was like, okay, so a pencil and I'm removing the body, like, groundbreaking. But there was something about, you know, I don't really place a figure in my work. I used to, I don't anymore. It's always about the figure implied. And what I really wanted from this and from the rest of the works is that the figure implied is you. Like, the figure implied is the consumer, always. And I think it's almost, this one is a nice kind of in between because of the materiality, because of the big full mattress with the upholstery, the leaning, all that's happening with that object also makes it so that that there's a humanity as well, that you're not quite, that's not quite tangible, but you're you know it's there. And so, you know, I wanted all of those tensions to exist in the object, because I think that that's the tension that exists, you know, when it's raining and COVID's running rampant and you want those noodles. And like what, you know, that it's such a weird, like, it really is such a weird state that we live in, with our own sort of fighting our own desires in that way. And I had talked to you about like actually talking to these Uber drivers, because I wanted to make sure that it was okay I was taking their photo, and they were down and they spoke to me about the work and all this stuff, and one of them had been to like one of the strikes or something that had happened. So like a lot was going down at that time, and I wanted to make sure that the thing was going to be respectful as much as it could be. And that, I think that fit in very much with the rest of the exhibition, and situating it where it is. I think years from now, we're going to look at this piece differently. Maybe we might be we talk about environmental things, you know, like it might have all of these things that I hope, you know, continue to bring conversations around it.
Totally, yeah. Well, maybe this is a good moment for questions if people have any. Let me see. So Namulen is asking, Lucia, have you thought about playing with scale in miniature?
You know what's funny is I have thought about it, and it might be a thing that comes with doing some. I've been doing some collages or playing around with some collages, and it's the smallest scale that I've done things in a long time. Aside from how I work, which is the screen and then it blows up, I think that's also like a funny scale thing. What I realize is I have a really weird sense of scale now. Like I don't know when something's too big or too small anymore. It's really bad. I should get that checked out or something. But now I'm like, I don't know if something's gonna be like humongous or too small for my apartment or something. I don't know.
That's funny. Okay, we have another question from Jennifer Chun. Would you speak about one important critique you received of your work, something which has either shaped you or helped you grow as an artist?
God, it seems everyone's always got something to say about my work because I have too many. No.
But which one has shaped you though?
You know what? I think there's a relationship that I hold very dear, and it's with my best friend Tahir, and him and I have the best conversations just about the work, like in a way that I don't think anybody ever really has with me. And
Nice.
and he really pushes me to think about the way that the works are in conversation, I think, and the ways in which I'm installing things, like being even more deliberate and more intentional and more like, so I think that I've really held close and really make sure that every space that I'm showing in, I'm being super careful about how things are being shown together, because it really does affect it affects the read of the work. Like I have been even a little bit like trepidatious, like I've been trying not to do too many group shows or things like that. Like I think the read of the work tends to shift and move, and that's good, but it also can be a bad thing. And so yeah, that's one of the things I'll tell you. He says there's like other funny jabs at, oh, it's that thing but just bigger, you know, and he'll and I make sure to not make it a gimmick. I make sure to continue to question why I'm doing it, So yeah, his voice lives inside me in a crazy way. I hope he knows this.
He'll definitely know this, know that after this being,
Yes.
you know,
He's probably
recorded in
taking
the immortality of the internet. Although I'm sure he knows it already from you directly.
Oh, he knows.
Yeah.
I had another question about this mattress piece, Lucia. I believe your uncle helped with.
So my uncle actually helped with the gates.
With the gates, right?
Yeah,
But
like
you collaborate quite a bit with your family, and how much of their critique or conversation actually gets involved in the work?
I think for me, it's mostly my mom that affects that. Like if she doesn't get something right away, I'm like, I'm not doing something right. You know, there's but I think in terms of when I want something to look the way that I want it to look, I'm very hard-headed in terms of that. That's like, I know exactly how I want that executed and we're gonna get it done. And I do my research as much as I can so that I'm not coming into, you know, their welding space and being like, do this. And they're like, those two metals don't go together, right? Like I'm not gonna be completely ignorant when I'm walking into that type of space. But there was a thing about the scale of the gates that they were really confused about, because they're like, wait, but you can just walk right through the space. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's not that. It's, you know, it's supposed to be, you know, as one of the guys surprised all of us. We should not have been surprised, but we were. And he called it a simulacra. And I was like, it's a simulacra, exactly. It's not supposed to be a thing. So there's like, in collaboration, there's always going to be the reality of a thing when someone tells you like, that can't be done, or we're not, you know, I don't think that's a possibility. I push them as much as I can, but there's just some things that just won't happen, or for safety won't happen. But I think most of my work is a collaboration with some sort of small business. So the mattresses might be the only one that are just like this big generic company that makes like printables on mattresses and on fabrics. But the printouts that I do for my bags and things like that are with a small business in the Bronx. And I love working with them. And I actually, as much as everyone's like, get your own plotter, which I would love that because it helps with time and it helps with production, which is what everyone is interested in, is that I like that ecosystem that I've created. I like that monthly, we go through a batch of prints and do the thing. And also he's the expert in cleaning and fixing those machines in a way that I might not have time for. And so there's also a part of it that's like working smarter and not harder. But yeah, I like the sort of community ecosystem, and that I'm gonna try at least that everything that I make also employs another group of people.
Totally. I wonder, I was thinking as you were talking, oh, I'm so sorry, Emma.
Oh no, it just, that's beautiful. Thank you, Lucia.
I was thinking as you were talking of also how you are influenced by your mom and like your maternal side, like your grandma, and the sewing and the fabric as a material. But then also hearing you talk about a sense of community, I was thinking of this idea of like the solo artist like locked in their studio archetype versus, you know, other models like music or theater, which I know that you're very also immersed in, because your father is a musician who was part of an important band, Dominican band, and because did you study theater or you just hung out with a bunch of theater people in school?
Hung out with a bunch of crazies.
But I know that you're deep in theater too, so I'm thinking of those other, you know, spaces where collaboration is more encouraged and almost essential, and how you're bringing that into your practice.
Joiri's mom danced to a lot of my dad's music.
Like every other Dominican mom.
But yeah, I think I don't love collaboration. It's funny. This is why I didn't choose to be a musician or an actress or anything like that. But I do think that there is a, that I have a sort of sense of guilt or duty to bring at least something like into the studio in that way. Because I can't just, I feel like if it's just me in there painting, or if it's just me, like I'm not satisfied. Like that doesn't make me happy at all. And it might be that. It might be having seen people work together and come together to make a thing.
Yeah.
Like I think me and my partner and my brothers and my father and all of that, like I think we care more about the musicians that made a Stevie Wonder track, like than most people care about Stevie Wonder. Like, and it's because it's like, because we know what it takes to build a thing. Like so many, that sound engineer has to be on point so that thing could come out that way. And he's probably a really bad example because he recorded all his own like things. But yeah, that's the thing that I really love. Like at any time that these shows happen, and my people get a shout out like in the catalog or within the title of the piece. Like the gates are titled in collaboration with Luigi Ironworks, and so they're always a part of the history of these objects. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, I think that kind of brings us to the end of the hour. So, well, thank you so much, Lucia, for sharing so much about your work. And Joiri, thank you so much for bringing your perspective and all the knowledge that you bring and that you can elucidate from the Dominican Republic. So thank you for calling in from so far away.
Yes, I'm actually in the Dominican Republic. I live in New York, but I'm here now.
Yeah,
I love that.
Which is so funny.
For this.
And thanks to everybody who joined this evening. And we will share this recording on the website at the Aldrich. And thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joiri. Thank you, Namulen.
Thank you, Lucia. Thank you, Namulen.